when we think of AI, we don't want to think of shoehorning AI in a place where it doesn't help, but we're trying to make sure that AI is there to really make a difference, both to the admin and to the person interacting with the service. We don't want it to be a replacement for a person. We want it to be a helper in both cases.
Welcome back to the Teams Insider podcast. This week, Aaron Steele takes us through his journey in Microsoft, all through the COVID funds, scaling out Teams, and deploying Teams in some really interesting use cases with global sports organizations during that COVID pandemic. And then coming out and leaving Teams and Microsoft and working at SOFTEL, trying to tackle the challenges of getting Teams Phone into the SMB and mid-market. Aaron's had a really interesting journey with the Teams product. Thanks for him for taking the time. And also many thanks to Neat, who are the sponsor of this podcast. Really appreciate their support. On with the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to the podcast. Excited to do this one. Aaron's a person I've spoken to for many, many years, mainly while he was at Microsoft. We'll go a little bit around his history and what he's currently doing in the Teams voice space. Aaron, thanks for coming on the pod. Do you want to just introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Hey, everybody. I'm glad to be here. Aaron Steele. I'm a practice lead now here at a company called SOFTEL. I've joined them fairly recently, and I came from, about 13 years at Microsoft. And before my time at Microsoft, I was everywhere in the everything from small to medium business in the world of healthcare. And then I joined in a couple of different educational institutions. So I was you may be familiar with DePaul University and the University of Chicago being a fairly big, well-known university worldwide. I was there working in the hospital space with them to do everything from AD consolidations to exchange migrations. So lots of experience in the higher ed and all the Microsoft technology space, and then moved into a little bit of consulting with a company called Point Bridge out of Chicago, who right before I left, and you may know folks from Point Bridge, folks like Jeff Schertz and others came from Point Bridge as well. Then from there, I moved to Microsoft, joined the Microsoft consulting firm, went back in the heyday of MCS in the sort of early 2010s. I was there doing consulting and working with some of the largest companies in the world, everybody from Accenture to your MasterCards to Johnson & Johnson to you keep going down the list and you can probably find my name, right? So I then moved into a role inside of Microsoft in what is now called CAPE. You recently talked with Tony, who's in the CAPE team now. And
yeah, there's a good pod on that if people want to get into the background of what CAPE is. I think that's the coolest acronym.
Yeah, exactly. So I was there when we were doing our Skype for Business and Teams customer experience programs, what they call in the Microsoft CXP. Yeah.
Awesome. So talk us through that Microsoft journey. Obviously, you did a lot of stuff before then in consulting. So it was MCS first, then you moved into product as well?
Yeah. So started with consulting and then moved a little bit into pre-sales architecture. And during the time at the end of my consulting journey was when I went out to Redmond and spent the 3 weeks to get my master's degree. My Microsoft Masters is I'm one of those few masters before Microsoft decided to cancel that program.
Yeah, it still hurts my heart that program's gone. That was such a good program.
Me too.
It was so nice to have a proper depth, high level kind of exam or kind of certification to shoot for.
Exactly. So that was a fairly sort of monumental thing. And folks, if you want to see me, you want to go watch a little of me, you could probably go look up me and Brian Ricks, because Brian Ricks and I spent about 20 hours at one point recording the entire Microsoft courseware for the Link 2010 exams.
Yeah, shout out to Brian, another friend of the show, great guy.
Yeah. So, and then from there, being in that sort of pre-sales role, then jumped into the product group, first in the product group where we were there as being effectively the backstop for escalations coming in when, as you're aware, when Skype for Business wasn't doing so well, right? In the world of Skype for Business, what we all know is people have challenges deploying that Skype for Business tool set where they might not understand and fully grok things like network bandwidth, quality of life, quality QoE settings and things of that nature. And truly, the requirements weren't all that well laid out. They were more recommendations, right? So choose to follow them at your own risk, but nobody's telling you have to. And then when it's going bad, we get brought in.
Then we point out you have to.
Exactly. So we would get brought in when an escalation would come into Satya or whoever the executive sponsor of that group was. And our team was there to effectively engage with those customers directly and help them to understand what the data was telling them. So if you're aware of the QoE Power BI reports and the QER process, that was part of what that team built. So I was part of the team that built that and have lots of deep understanding of the CQD and quality of experience.
Yeah, well, the Gets Green and those kind of programs.
Exactly, and actually QoE and the whole QER process. That's a fairly interesting one for me, partially because you may not know, but that all started because of Accenture.
Oh, okay. They were the primary driver, were they? Interesting.
Yeah, we were in Chicago, and Accenture had a base in Chicago. And Wei Zhang, if you're familiar with who he is, he was originally homed in Chicago. So I, being there in the office in the Aon Tower, overheard one day that we were on a similar call because I was on the Accenture call, and then I hear a little a ways from me, hey, wait, that guy's on the same call I am. I walk over to him. The original version of the CQD call quality dashboard was sitting on a machine under Wei's desk there in Chicago. Amazing. And he was building that to help Accenture run through that QER process, which was what Andrew Snyderman envisioned working with Accenture.
Yeah, that was amazing when it was, and those tools still exist today against Teams as well, but they were
exactly. So
when we had servers, it was much more complicated because it was so much more dependent on the customer's network.
Exactly. So from there being in, and that team was technically homed in the office space. Bob Davis being the leader of the entire office group inside of Microsoft, that was who we were under. But then at some point right around when Teams was getting envisioned, our entire team got picked up and shifted directly into the Teams product group. And we became effectively the Teams migration engine for the Teams product group inside of the Teams product group.
And what was the feeling at that time? It was an interesting time because a lot of us were very wed to Skype for Business at the time, and Teams launched without UC. Teams was just chat, if people can remember back that far, and then we got VoIP. It was quite a journey.
Yeah, it was an interesting time because what we were being told was this is the future, but it wasn't a feature-complete product. So it was a lot of discussing with customers what their needs, what their drivers were, what their blockers were, understanding technical limitations, and working truly with the back-end product group teams to understand why aren't these customers moving? What is holding them back? What are the gotchas? What are the things that we really need to implement to really accelerate or make this happen? And then, March 2020 happens. Right?
Yeah. And suddenly everything got a massive acceleration to cloud.
Exactly. So March 2020 happens. I'm still in the Teams product group. We're there. And then all of a sudden, I've been, at the time when March 2020 happened, I had already been working from home effectively for 8 years. So to me, nothing really changed. Right? Yeah. I had an office. I was working from home. I had the bandwidth. It was just now I was on calls a little more often. Right. And all the trips I had planned were canceled, right? So I got to spend some time in some really interesting customers with the COVID time. So I was part of the team that was helping to put on the NBA bubble games. So back in the early...
talk about that. Did we do a podcast on this, or we did something on this? But this is really cool.
Yeah, we may not have talked. I don't know. So in the world, so the NBA approached us, and we have a dedicated team who's really there in the account team space who works with a lot of the sports organizations. So there's a bunch of people who are very familiar with those sports organizations, and so we got in there and started working directly with the NBA. And I'll tell you, it was a really interesting solution. They are a world-class organization in terms of what they're able to do from a network and a TV presentation, world. They have, so those, the arenas that they took over in Orlando, that was just half of the world for them. Right. So they had those 3 arenas and stadium and setups where they could actually have games taking place at one time. Then they had independent TV trucks there with dedicated network bandwidth between them and Secaucus, New Jersey, which is actually where all their switching infrastructure is. Orlando to New Jersey.
Right. So they were just beaming it raw across there, and then they were switching and cutting.
And then, because of the setup we had, beaming it back.
Oh, right, because there was so for people not familiar, they had this like crazy remote viewers were in the stadium, basically.
Exactly. They had each one of those arena spaces or courtyard spaces had 10 LED panels, and each of those LED panels was like 9 foot high by 30 foot long. Right. And what we did was we had that set up such that they had VMware machines running the Teams client. And then we were extracting with NDI the people who had joined those Teams meetings to put them physically onto those screens in the stadiums. And then the actual TV cameras that were capturing that video broadcast that was going to the TVs were also piping that all the way up to New Jersey, so that a separate set of machines that were also joined to those same meetings could inject that video so that the people in those Teams meetings were actually watching the game.
That's so cool.
And then back in Orlando, we were pulling those videos. They were being recorded, and those video of them was being shown on that screen. All up, we figure the latency number that they were getting from effectively screen to eye to screen was 2 seconds.
Wow. That's crazy.
And they were doing 2 seconds when they were able to do that between Orlando and New Jersey back to Orlando.
That's awesome. And you got quite deep into, weren't you product managing some of the NDI stuff at some point, or some of those features?
A little bit. So Aaron Linney was actually the product manager, and Andrew, there was an Andrew guy who was actually the owner of those kinds of pieces of the stack at the time. But I was there being the technical person to help the NBA actually get this implemented, giving them all the requirements about what the hardware they needed to provision on those machines was, what the bandwidth needed to be, any weirdness in how NDI presented, or any of those things.
Yeah, and that investment continues today. I know for the large events in particular, they use NDI for bringing complex broadcast into Teams, town hall and live events, and vice versa.
NDI, OBS, and RTMP and SRT in the future are sort of the world of, if you want it to look the way you want it to look, not how the client wants it to look.
Yeah. So if you're broadcast, you see those kind of remote interviews, all those kind of things, that'll be NDI mostly. Yeah,
exactly. And it's a really powerful tech. So NDI, if people aren't familiar with it, SDI is the world of broadcast, but it's effectively a high-def, uncompressed video stream across a BNC-capable network physical connection. And with NDI, it's the same thing, but across a switched but capable network. And I say switched there to be very specific because it is switches, not routers. Routers don't like to pass NDI because it's ridiculously high bandwidth. Right. For anybody who's ever tried to do this, if you're thinking about NDI, when I talk to customers about NDI, I stop talking about 100 base and I start talking about 2.5 or 10 gig.
Yeah, so you need a proper network.
Proper network, because the bandwidth between 2 NDI switches, one video stream between 2 NDI switches is 80 megabit.
Wow. It's crazy.
That's what uncompressed 1080p signal is.
Yeah. So not even 4K, just 1080.
Yeah, that's just 1080. So went from there. We had all that, and then we took what we learned there and we started doing that for everything else. So we did that for tennis tournaments down in the South America. We started working with the golfing organizations around the world. We did some work with the Aston Martin F1 team. So there were just any number of situations where Teams became that solution that was really able to bring remote attendees in to a meeting platform to be able to be remote attendees, but also somehow appeared on stage. I mean, we also did this with Christie's, the auction house, and we did it with Prada for one of their sort of runway shows during the early days of the pandemic.
That's awesome. It's so fun when you get to do like stretch the technology and also do it with some kind of like world-class brand and scenario stuff. Really interesting.
Exactly. So it was a really fun time, and it was a really interesting time to be around because there were all these changes coming and there were all these interesting ideas that everybody was thinking about. Everything from webinars to how do you integrate video to how do you make it be better to what are the real challenges that make people, have problems using Teams? Are they the same challenges we had in Skype or are they different challenges?
Yeah. So let's fast forward. So you're now outside of Microsoft, you're SOFTEL. What's your role in SOFTEL?
Yeah, so in SOFTEL, I've got the title of UC Practice Lead. So what we mean in the world of SOFTEL for me is I'm basically there ensuring the health and delivery of the efforts we have to help our customers in all the places that we SOFTEL play.
Awesome.
But I'm specifically in the world of the modern work, though.
Yeah, and SOFTEL span consulting and software and solutions. Is that right?
Exactly. So we're professional services, but also an ISV. And whether or not you may have heard of us, we've been around for about 30 years, and we've been heavily in the background of the entire sort of telephone industry. So we are very deeply ingrained in the worlds of AT&T and Verizon here in the US and BT and Deutsche Telekom and others in other parts of the world.
Awesome. And we were talking offline, you're looking at kind of some of the challenges of helping customers, particularly SMB, mid-market, kind of tooling for the telcos. That seems to be a real challenge that lots of people are taking a crack at the moment. Talk us through that challenge. Yeah,
so there's two parts of this challenge. First is from the small and medium business point of view, their challenge is a challenge that Microsoft creates that Microsoft's never really going to solve, which is too many admin interfaces to get a lot of these tasks done. And you have to know all you need to know about these admin interfaces, and you can't easily jump from another platform into that platform. And with small and medium businesses, often their administration interface for their phone system is either open a help desk ticket with their phone service provider, or it might be a little portal where they can do minor changes to things like routing or voicemail or things like that. They don't have the concept of why do I need to sign into this big thing called the Teams Admin Center, and why are there 16 different sections there, and what do you mean meeting rooms?
And then Exchange, then Intune, then we've got Rooms, so we need the Rooms Pro portal, and
we've got
user accounts, so that's
there's this thing called Entra. Portal. And what is Entra? How does that relate to identity, and why do I need to go to that portal? And what do you mean I have to do Entra plus Azure? Right?
Yep.
So that's the challenge directly for the phone admin inside of the small to medium business, and why it's such a challenge for the consulting firms who are helping those small businesses to use Teams as their phone system, independent of the technology challenge of sort of getting that thing done.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Because lots of them are using, Office 365 has 400 million users, plenty of those are SMB and mid-market. So the core functionality they just crack on with, but it's when you're lighting up more advanced functionality, it starts to get more complicated.
That's exactly it. You get these challenges. And then there's the challenge that the small to medium sort of the consulting firms have on the same side, which is how do they scale when they're there to help multiple customers? Can they actually help multiple customers at once to actually administer their systems and run those things? So they have that same challenge from that side of it. They may want to, and they may be there to actually, hey, we'll help you migrate and get onboarded, but how quickly can we do that, and how efficiently can we manage those things?
Yeah, and that's competitive on the back end. So if you're a telco, you might have these giant multi-tenant platforms where you can manage customers, jump in and out, do it probably all automated as well. And they're looking at our world and going, well, wait a minute, how do I scale up to millions of users? If it's 50 users at a count, how does that work? Yeah,
how does that work, and what does that actually mean? And what if you actually ask AT&T, they've effectively, being a telco, they are not trying to sell Teams into any customers because they don't have the people who can do it, let alone the small to medium business customers. They don't want to invest because there's such a high barrier to entry, again, because of all those challenges.
Yeah.
So we're approaching this a little bit uniquely, and there's some other players who are doing similar things, but we're approaching this from a point of view of where can we leverage AI to actually help things, and where can we leverage workflow automation tasks to make these things simpler and make it so that there are self-service portals that are simple, like those people in those small to medium businesses are used to having self-service portals to make requests and have workflows to do things for them. Also, providing for multi-tenant coverage, for providing for extended levels of RBAC that the native Microsoft tools don't.
Interesting. And like, how do you see it? Do you think that the end customers are going to drive that, or do you think it will be the telcos or MSPs or CSPs that drive that?
We really think that this is a winning story for the MSPs and the telcos who are doing this work for the end customers. Because what we figure is, one, it's a little bit of potential for profit for them, and it's also a reduction in workload for them as the service provider for those people, right? So they can do the work. And part of the other thing of this, it's not just the ongoing management tooling, it's also migration and onboarding tooling.
Yep.
Right? And a relatively simple deploy to connect to a phone system, suck out all the information, assess what that phone system has, and give pointers for the team who's migrating that into Teams, technically, or Zoom or WebEx, but me being a Microsoftie, I like to think about the Teams world. So it gives that simpler interface and a clearer report to the actual MSP who's doing that work, so they can very possibly do that work faster.
Yep, makes sense.
Right, so they don't have to be as nearly as manually interactive about manually interrogating what is on that source system.
And what are the types of systems that these customers are running that they're migrating from?
Yeah, so they can be everything from Cisco to Mitel, Avaya, NEC. NEC is a fairly big one we're seeing, partially because of their abandonment of the phone system market, right? So it's one that a lot more customers are coming up and thinking about, because NEC gave them that sort of hard timeline that is when you have to get off our system, even though we just sold it to you.
So there's a bit of motivation there to actually move.
Exactly. And then, we still get a lot of customers who are coming in and thinking about this where they've got Cisco systems. We've got customers also who are migrating from 8x8 or from Zoom or from other platforms like that. Yeah, so
it might be UCaaS to UCaaS as well.
Exactly.
During the pandemic, there were a lot of UCaaS deals signed as like, quick, we need something. And also there was, there's a case to be made by Teams is a very different product than it was back then. Now we're ready to go. How do we get there?
Yeah. It's ready. And with the whole move towards Operator Connect has been a real sort of eye opener for a lot of these customers, and some of the phone system providers who are doing this work, the likes of Lumen and Granite and those, and even like Bandwidth. right? They are seeing Operator Connect as a real enabler for them to be able to target some of these smaller and medium businesses because it's such a low barrier to entry with such a high integration point into Teams. So there's so much less that the admin has to even know about to use to turn on Operator Connect. They don't have to understand voice routing policies or anything like that. They don't technically have to understand lots of things. They can just sort of purchase an Operator Connect license and get it set up and provisioned with an Operator Connect partner. And all of a sudden, those numbers are just lit up in their Teams tenant, and they can just turn them on and give them to users. They don't even have to, import weird things and do weird things about DID management.
Yeah, that's it. If they're a pure Team shop and the phone numbers can turn up in Teams Admin Center, they've got a fighting chance of assigning them and using them, definitely.
Yeah. But then when you think about this in the other piece we've got when we're thinking about our platform is it's also a really robust roles-based access control, as well as site-based delegation models, as well as a very complete DID management tool, so that you have that full insight into the numbers inside of your environment. And again, that spans whether it's the service provider providing that to a small to medium customer or even a large enterprise to the small to medium customer doing that themselves.
Yeah, it's a really interesting space because I feel like Microsoft have kind of nailed the enterprise with Teams. Like enterprise customers by and large are 365 customers, and by and large they're ticking down that. Not necessarily everybody, but most people are ticking down that road, site by site, country by country. Yep. But the SMB and mid market, which is way more web to phone, like their workflows are more phone centric. There's still definitely work to be done there for Teams to kind of crack that nut, I think.
Yeah, and that's sort of what we think is a differentiator that we have that we can bring to bear for this is we really think that we SOFTEL have such deep experience in the world of phones and the world of telephony. And part of this is we're driving this directly with the telephony providers. We want to be that engine so that Verizon, all their small to medium customers who are on hosted Cisco or systems like that, or who have PRI trunks coming in, why can't we help them get onto Teams if they're already using Teams for everything but telephony? And why can't we help you, Verizon, to do that really quickly?
Yeah, it makes sense. Interesting.
Yeah,
awesome.
We'll actually, I'm not sure if this will be out in time, but we're going to be down at Ignite next week. I'm looking forward to seeing you down there.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to catching up as well. It'll be good.
Yeah, definitely. And while we're there, we're going to actually be presenting to the telcos at a summit directly for the telcos that is being hosted by Microsoft at its Downers Grove office.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. Like you can see Microsoft are engaging and they want to solve this problem and help the customers, which is great.
Yeah, so it's an interesting thing. And then the other piece of it for us at SOFTEL, it's not just solve that problem, but it's also we have the really deep expertise in everything from contact center. And when we say contact center, we do really truly mean contact center. It's the likes of, we have people who came from Nuance. Right? We have people who have 20 and 30 years of industry experience designing contact center solutions and implementing contact center solutions. So it's that, plus we've developed AI chatbots for contact center integrations, for incident management and incident integrations, right? We also have tooling that's capable to help customers manage their emergency services calling. As we know, the Microsoft world of when data has to update for your emergency services, it's kind of let's delete that and start over.
Yeah. Again, complicated. Fine if you've got someone who looks after telephony full time, you can understand it. But
if you have 50 people and your IT guy is more of a help desk guy, does he really know enough to actually update the Liz database when a subnet changes?
Yeah. I think, well, I was just saying, we know plenty of enterprises that don't do that, let alone SMB in this market. So, it's quite a challenge.
Yeah. So we're trying to be concentrated in this world of telephony and contact center spaces, but also ensuring that when we think of AI, we don't want to think of shoehorning AI in a place where it doesn't help. but we're trying to make sure that AI is there to really make a difference, both to the admin and to the person interacting with the service. We don't want it to be a replacement for a person. We want it to be a helper in both cases. Because what we know is in a lot of service desks and help desks, that first level person, their job is really just to record the information and get the person off the phone as quickly as possible. Right? They don't have any, that's the metric they're metriced on.
Yeah.
And that doesn't really help anybody. But if we can bring in a way for them to actually have functional and capable answers so that you increase the level of first level ticket closure, not just first level ticket moving, right? By giving them an AI that can help them do the job, but they're still there to interpret and give that answer to the customer.
Yeah, it's really interesting, that idea of having AI coaching contact center agents, and like very often the answer is in some massive knowledge base, but they're not going to get to it in real time. But the AI can actually listen into the call and proactively prompt as well, which is really interesting.
Exactly. Listen to that call and do things like fraud prevention on those calls to prevent phishing interactions. Right?
Yeah.
So helping, we really are thinking of this and bringing the idea of AI for helping rather than AI because.
I was going to say it's very different inside of Microsoft, but maybe that's a bit harsh.
Yeah, we know that Microsoft is really pushing the world of Copilot and AI. And yes, it's valid and it has a lot of great use cases. But at the same token, forcing it there to shoo somebody out of a job doesn't feel good to me.
Yeah, and there's just lots of experimenting at the moment. It's like, I think the latest thing is Outlook themes with AI, and it's like, who was asking for that really? But you can find really those kind of coaching use cases are really strong as well.
Yeah, so some coaching cases are good. There are some cases and interesting use cases in the world of Copilot. Hell, I used Copilot the other day. It helped me to actually write a PowerShell script to
I do that all the time.
To create call queues from a CSV input.
Yeah, I do that loads. It's so useful, especially when you vaguely know what you want to do, but you need that little bit of help. It's awesome.
Exactly. So again, use AI to actually help people, not use AI to replace people is sort of a way we're thinking about this at SOFTEL in a more real sense.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Aaron, for taking us down the journey. Look forward to catching up with you at Ignite. It's going to be a good time, lots to talk about. And if you want to find out more about what you're doing or about SOFTEL, what's the best thing to do?
So first and foremost, www.softel.com, SOFTEL.com. And also you can email me or contact me. It's ASTEELE@softel.com, and I'll reply to you as quickly as I can. And I include a book link in my replies to my email, so you can always find time to meet with me.
Awesome. Thanks, Aaron. Great to catch up.
Thanks, Tom.